Well, we've got quite a few people on, and I'm sure we'll still get more, but we might as well get started because we have a great discussion happening tonight. So welcome, everybody. I'm Steve Crowley. I'm with the Vermont chapter of the Sierra Club, and welcome to our regular series of community conversations. Tonight, we've got a great discussion with two representatives of the Abenaki. We have Rick Holschuh from the Elnu Band of Abenaki, and he's also the director of Atowi, which he is going to explain to us in just a minute. And then we have Melody Brook, who's a citizen of the Abenaki, of the Elnu Abenaki as well. And they are going to start out just kind of sharing the stage here and back and forth a little bit and telling their story. And then we will open it up for discussion. And so if you have questions, feel free to post them in the chat, and our speakers may get to them while they're doing their initial presentation, but we'll certainly get to them afterwards when we get into our general discussion. And so put things in the chat and we'll keep a stack going. And otherwise, we do request that you keep your mic on mute, and which I'm sure you're all used to at this point. And I think that's it. Oh, I should mention, we are recording this. So if you want your, you're welcome to have your face show up on the screen here, or if you don't want to, that's fine too. So that's it. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Rich and Melody, and thank you both for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having us. And Rich, can you explain your affiliation and what you are doing with your awesome project?
Well, thank you very much. That kind introduction, that opening. Sure. So I will explain what Atowi is all about. Atowi is an Abenaki word. Now you can say Abenaki, you can say Abenaki, you can say Abenaki, you can say Abernaki, and you can say Wombanaki. And you're just saying, you're saying the same thing, so that's fine. But I just ask that you say it. Don't ignore it. So Atowi is an Abenaki word, and it means together in space and time. And it describes a new project that we are launching in the southern part of the state in collaboration with Retreat Farm, which is located in Brattleboro, traditionally known as Wantastagok. And Atowi proposes to use this setting of being together in space and time to answer the question of, we're all here now, what are you going to do about it? And Melody and I are going to be talking about some of these stories and explaining this situation to you in terms of what it means to be an indigenous person and to be a person in your homeland. And as a conservation organization, Sierra Club, this is something you deal with on a regular basis. And we hope to bring some things to light here that might be new and valuable for that conversation to expand it. So that's what Atowi Project is about. It's brand new, and so we're still figuring out exactly what that looks like. But we have a website, Atowi, ATOWI.org, and we're on Facebook if you do the Book of Face. So, Melody, you want to explain a little bit about, where you're coming from?
Sure. And one thing I'll mention is that you are going to be looking through the world through a different set of eyes. And so in the words of the wonderful Joseph Bruchac, pour out your cup and hold it out empty and fill it with stories. So we're going to fill your cup with some of our stories about how we see the world and why that matters in terms of sustainability and conservation. And in particular, Rich said something about how we see things, but it's also how can you be an ally in someone else's homeland? And that's a really important question. And I think just asking for our feedback, that's where you start. So thank you. And we're also going to first talk about just lay a little bit out there about who we are as people, because maybe not everybody knows about the indigenous people of the Dawnland. And We are the people of the dawn, the first people to see the light of dawn in this continent. We have, there are the Eastern and Western Abenaki, the Wabanaki, and that's comprised of many different groups of people from the Penobscot, Passamaquoddy, and Micmac and Maliseet to the Western Abenaki, which is us. So, and in Vermont and New Hampshire, especially in that area, there are 4 recognized bands, which were recognized in 2010, 2011. So, but there's more people than that. And there's also our relatives in Lower Canada, and we can never forget them. So, so we have the Elnu, which is based in southern Vermont and based out of Jamaica, Vermont. And then there is the Nulhegan, which is in the northeast kingdom. And then the northwest corner is, and down through Chittenden County would be Missisquoi. And then the Kawasik, one of the bands, which was one recognized and one not. But as borders went through us, they're based in New Hampshire, but they come through central Vermont. So that's a little bit about us. And if people have questions about recognition and all that, we can answer them. But that's not why we're here today. But there are officially 4 state recognized bands at this point. Rich, any thoughts?
Sure. So in the interest of not assuming anything, some folks may know a few things, others may not. Who are the indigenous people? As Melody explained, basically we're talking about the Abenaki people here in their homelands, of which Vermont is a part. The Abenaki and their ancestors have been here for, depending on which academic expert you talk to, you could say 12 to 13,000 years. That's a very long time. European settlers have been here for just a blink of an eye, but they have left their mark. Thus, the need to be paying attention to what we're doing with the land in terms of conservation. And I would suggest to you that folks might say, you know, well, there were never any Native people here. That's something that we were actually taught. It was literally taught in the Vermont schools and in the textbooks. That's a big false truth to go up against, but it is false. And they might say, well, prove it. And I would say, look around you. What do you see? And they'll say, I don't see anything. And I'll say, well, there you go. That's one way of being in relationship with the land. You can be here for 12,000 years and basically leave no mark. But after 260 years, here in Brattleboro, where I live, this town basically came into existence in 1760. It's pretty obvious that people have been here that long. And there are places in this town now, as there are in many other towns, where you actually can't use the land any longer. It's been kind of spoiled. So these are different ways of interacting with and being in the land. And as an indigenous person, if you look that up in the dictionary, what's it going to say? It's going to say the original people of a place. And so we tend to focus on the people part. And we know some of those names, right? The Dene, the Mohawk, the Navajo, the Apache, the Abenaki. What we don't talk about is the land part. That's what makes them indigenous. They are of that place. And to the degree that they consider themselves to be the same as the place, the people are the land, and the land is the people. And when you get down into that basic set of understandings, you start to get a clue as to how one might behave in that setting. If the earth is yourself, it is actually your family. It comprises all of your relations. You're going to treat it differently. I'm going to bounce this off over to you, Mel.
Okay, thanks. And one thing that I always heard that I think is really important to mention is that human beings, we are just one form of a person, and anything in our world that is part of creation is a person. And so when I think of land, I think of relatives. I think of Mother Earth. I think of Corn Mother. I think of all my other relations that are here, and we have a responsibility to them. And the heart of our culture is really reciprocity and responsibility. And so what does it mean when I walk outside and creation knows me? What does it mean for me to be able to speak words out into all the world and get an answer? And everybody else can do this too. What does it mean to live on the circle of creation, to know that all other things are people and that human beings are one form of that? My chief Roger, he told us this wonderful creation story, and there are many creation stories because as we change over time, you always need a new story. So what's the story we're going to tell? And that, I'll be very quick, that story, all the beings in all the world, we were the last ones created, so we are the last in line. And Creator had a giant bag, and they had all these beautiful gifts to give to people. And you know, all of our winged friends got their beaks and their claws and their wings, and all of the creepy crawlies got all their wonderful things, and everything went down through the line. And when it got to us, there was nothing left in the bag. So what do you think they gave us? They gave us our brain, and they said, you have a responsibility to take care of all the other things that came before you. So when we talk about this as a homeland, when I talk about land, it's very important to understand that when I talk about it, I provide a center, we all provide a center, and that, you know, every morning when I get up with my daughter, I welcome the sun. Because, you know, they always told us that as long as there's a Wabanaki person to welcome the sun, that it would rise every day. So what does it mean? You know, so many people talk about, especially in conservation and sustainability, that human beings are the problem. Well, you wouldn't be the problem if you restored your relationship to land. Land is pharmacy, land is identity, land is relative, mother, whatever. Land is supermarket, land is inspiration, land is ceremony, all of these things. You would treat it differently, you would walk a little softer, and there would be no need for sustainability because that relationship would sustain all of us. So anyway, I'm off my high horse. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk. Rich, do you have anything to say?
No, I'm all done. No, I'm just kidding.
Nice.
Rob's going to have to edit out that rant that you just went on, or not. Melody used the word center. I'd like to give you a little story to put into your cup that you're holding out. And this is a story that I've shared often. I was listening to a speaker, Teokasin Ghost Horse, who was a Lakota teacher and musician. And he was telling a little story about when he was walking out on his reservation, which I believe is Pine Ridge out west. And he said that he was out in the hills traveling through the brush. And he was where most people would describe as in the middle of nowhere. We've all used that expression. But he caught us, the audience, and he said, but I was not. I was in the center of everything. And I have remembered that for years now, and it kind of turns everything on its head. It changes your priorities around, and it speaks of your relationship to what's going on around you. In terms of, instead of being in the middle of nowhere, there's just all this indistinguishable nothingness that you can't relate to. You're standing in this place, and you're in the center, not because you're the most important, but because, as Melody pointed out, all of these things around you are looking at you. They're all looking at you, and you are just one of them. And how are you going to be with that in the presence of this? It's not that you are in charge and all of this doesn't really matter. It's that you now have a responsibility. You're surrounded by all of these things, and what you do matters. The decision that you make in that present moment, how you're going to be with this, matters, because this is your family, and these are all people. They all have spirit. They're all willing to share this with you, or they're willing to receive from you. It's a really different way of moving through space. You're literally oriented in space. Picture yourself Picture yourself as a point in space, not just the four directions around you, the usual four directions of east, south, west, and north. You have the world that's above you also. You have the world that's below you. Those are very, very real worlds. Whether you see them or not, they're there. And then you have the world that's inside of you, what you're doing about it. And so you are a point in space. And as you move through space, whether you're walking or you're swimming or sliding down the hill, as you move through space, those relationships are changing constantly as you move through space. And creation is recreating itself. It's continual. There's nothing new on this planet. Nothing new. It's all here. Matter and energy are conserved, right? All it does is change into something else. And so as you move through the space, this one point, this one spirit, you're changing your relationship with all these things around you, and you're paying attention to that. And it doesn't have to be overwhelming. Just know your place. I'm just one thing, one person, one entity in the middle here. And all of these other things matter just as much as I do. And they do have spirit. They do have personhood. If an Abenaki person looks at a tree, for example, these things carry through in the language. The language embodies these ways of knowing and being. If an Abenaki person looks at a tree, for example, and you don't know what kind of a tree it is, you would say, Awanina abazi. And that might translate as, what's that tree? But actually what you said is, who is that tree? That tree is recognized as an entity, as a person, and you call it a who, not a thing. And so this is a different way of being in the world and relating to it. It comes right out in the language.
What happens if the whole world is animate? And that's what you're talking about.
Oh boy.
Right? I mean, and just because you don't know something you don't know how to talk to something doesn't mean it's not talking to you. So one of my elders, Rose, we were walking through the woods once and looking at all the other people and thinking about, in this time of COVID when everybody seems to be alone, just walk outside. Look at all the friends you have that you didn't even know you had, right? Just because you listen to this talk, how great is that? But Rose, one day, she was saying to me, "Oh my God, did you see that rock?" And I was like, okay, which of the 400 that we just walked by did I see? And so I was like, of course. And she's like, that one. It's telling us it needs to move. It can't move on its own. And so it needs a new perspective. And if you're thinking about something, it's there. It's talking to you. And so what does that mean? And what does it mean to be in someone else's homeland? And I will say that humans can provide a beautiful place, a beautiful center to the world. And one of my friends, Frog, who's in our tribe, he once said that Western society, they will level a mountain to see the sunrise a little bit better. And for us, we will walk up to the top of the mountain, which is also a person, and we might find ourselves on the way and we still get to see the beautiful sunrise. And so that's the difference, right? We're all in this together. And a couple years ago, I was working on the Equal Rights Amendment here in Vermont, and I was at a governor's conference, and they asked me to speak. And my responsibility, remember the story I told you, my responsibility is to speak for all those other things that can't speak for themselves in a way that you will understand. And so I said, you know what, this is great. Thank you so much for including us. And what about all those other people? What about the personhood of the trees? What about the nation of martins and the nation of deer? And maybe let's talk about the nations of cabbages. I don't know. What's their rights? And everyone just looked at me like, what? She lost me. And I hope that people after that day kind of thought about it a little more. And I hope that everybody else does too. And, as Rich, you were saying, everything as personhood, it also means that my life is not more important or less important than a worm. It's exactly the same. So when we eat dinner, we have ceremony as equally as much for the cabbage as we do for the deer. Both of those things are as important as each other and as important as me. And so what does it mean to live in a way like that? And I will say one last thing before I'll turn it over to Rich. I was reading an article about the Mi'kmaq people and how people who were worried about sustainability on the coasts found that there was a lot of erosion, and they're like, why is it just now that we're having all these issues? Well, when you take people out of their traditional homelands, maybe stack them up on reservations, and you don't let them access the place they should be accessing in their own homelands, well, the shell middens go away. The shells where they were eating and then they would throw their shells along the coast, it was providing a barrier and it was protecting it. And so when people say, oh, we're the problem, no, you still have to interact with the land. You still have to provide a center to it. And there can be a beautiful way of doing that. So for Indigenous people, we know that 100%. Go ahead, Rich. Do you have anything to add?
Sure. Yeah, I want to emphasize that conservation as a concept, we talk about saving something. What are we saving it from? Often we're saving it from ourselves, but we're saving it from the poor decisions that we've made. And there are other ways to be in those places, and they do include people. And that depends on the decisions that you're making. And you're going to make those decisions based on your values. You could call those original instructions, traditional values. They're out there. They've been around for a really, really long time, and they've held up because they work. It's people behaving poorly and making bad decisions. I don't want to use bad as a pejorative. It's a decision that moves one away from relationship, moves out of balance. Things tend to move out of balance because, entropy, right? Chaos happens, and sometimes people are very good at fomenting that. So it takes a constant input, and it takes a good decision, and your culture should help you with that. And these traditional teachings are something that can be of use in that regard. Now, I don't want this to come across as being romanticizing something, or it being like some woo-woo esoteric fantasy. It's not. It actually works. I think the 12,000-year track record is a good evidence of that. And it's calling it romantic or a fantasy. I would say that is another way. It's like code for saying that it's not real, that it doesn't matter, it's not important. But I might suggest that that's exactly the point. It is real. This is what matters. And to behave otherwise is not acting in accord with what is true. Making those decisions that elevate one's own interests or one's own species ahead of everything else, and taking yourself out of relationship. A little example, I do a lot of historical research down here in my area, Woontostogoq, Brattleboro, because I think one's relationship with the place where one lives is where change starts, where you can start to make a difference. And so history tells us that down here in Brattleboro, as an example, a man named Ezra Stiles, the Reverend Ezra Stiles, who was a minister in the colonial days. He was actually president at Yale at one time, and a very well-traveled person. He had an insatiable curiosity, and he wrote everything down in his journals and his diaries. And so we can glean a lot of little tidbits of information from reading Ezra Stiles' diaries. And he talks about when he was on a survey party, and he came up the Connecticut River from Connecticut, his home base, and they traveled up to Brattleboro. Lo and behold, and they took a left at the West River, which is in confluence with the Connecticut here. And they went a little bit up the river, and they hit a trail, and they were heading west to survey the brand new town of Draper. Everybody knows where Draper, Vermont is, right? No, you don't, because it's not called Draper anymore. It's now called Wilmington. Wilmington is near Dover, the Mount Snow Valley. You may have heard of Wilmington. So they were going over to see Draper/Wilmington and stick some pins in the ground and blaze some trees and create a new town to be settled. And when he entered the forest off the West River, he wrote about it. He said, we went into the woods, and he said there was no undergrowth. It was completely clear. And this is a little clue here as to what was going on in that place before the settlers showed up. These were managed forests. These were people who were living in relationship with that place and taking care of it. It was a big garden down by the water. Further away you got from the water, not so much. But down by the water, it was beautiful. It's like a park. He said there was a white ash tree. He encountered a white ash tree that was 5 feet thick and 100 feet to the first branch. I'd like you to show me a white ash tree like that nowadays. And this was just not one tree. This was what he was looking at as he went into the woods. Now, this was about 1763, I think, maybe 68. I can't remember the date, but around that, 1760s. And if we kind of like take a little snapshot of the way Vermont was settled, we could say that about 60 years later, say 1820, all of those trees were gone. All of them were gone. That's people making some poor decisions. And we're dealing with that now. So how can people live in a certain place for 12,000 years, and you end up with ash trees that are 5 feet thick and 100 feet to the first branch? And 60 years later, they're all gone. So these are things that give one pause and something to think about. How is it when you walk into the forest? Are you looking at your family, or are you looking at resources? And are those things incompatible? I don't think so. It works. Give it a try. That's kind of one of the problems here, is that nobody's giving it a try. and how do you go about giving it a try? I would say that one of the things that could be done is to bring this perspective, these voices, this way of being into policymaking. Whether it's Sierra Club in the Vermont chapter or the national organization. Do you have Native advisors on the board? Does well, I can answer this question. Does the Vermont Agency of Natural Resources have a Native person on their advisory boards? No, they do not. Why is that? Is there any other group of people here that has a tighter connection to that land and wants to have a better relationship with these places in their homelands and see them thrive? I think that's kind of a no-brainer. It's something that can be done. Back to you, Mel.
Thank you. Yeah, that brought up a lot, and the real question here is, well, and I'll say that the other day I had I think it was Channel 3 interview me, and then after the interview he started talking about, oh yeah, you might find this interesting. Later I'm gonna be doing some research on sustainability, because one thing I mentioned to him as I was like, I went to UVM. I worked at Champlain, and Burlington was an important place for over 10 years for me. And I'd go to work, and you know what I see as a Native person, as someone, this is my homeland. I look out onto the water, and if I had a bad day, I see my creators sitting there. And after he created, or after he transformed the world, he rolled and he grew legs and arms, because when you shape something new, you shape yourself too. And when he was done, he sat down in Patavagak, which is Lake Champlain, which is not the real name, but that's okay. And and he sat down and he's looking over all things. And I see him all the time, and that's what I see. And when I was talking to the reporter, I was like, if you want to know if something is broken, you look at the things that are important to you. And one of those things is, I am so tired of hearing about how they cannot, in Burlington and the area, keep all of the sewage, the raw sewage, out of the lake. Like, what are you doing? And if you're talking about your relationship to indigenous people, well, you're failing, okay? And my creator is swimming in your poop, and that really bugs me. And then we started talking about sustainability in the lake, and he said, oh yeah, I'm going to be talking to different farmers and what they think about how we can transition. I was like, are you asking a native person? Because we've been here for since ever, more than 10,000 years. And if you're going to ask anybody, we kept it beautiful this whole time. So why wouldn't you ask us? And so he just kind of thought about it. And it seems like such a revolutionary concept. But now ask yourself this question that I asked at the beginning. What is your responsibility in someone else's homeland? And when I lived in Virginia this last couple of years, I just moved back. I ask myself that all the time. And the first thing I did is I established a connection to all my new relations. And I looked at the land around me and I asked those people what they thought. What does this place mean to you? And what is my responsibility to you to make sure I'm preserving it? Not just preserving, what does preservation mean? What does sustainability mean? And for me, something's only sacred because of your continuous relationship with it. It is, for us, sustainability isn't about, I'm going to take this piece of forest and we're going to buy it and no one can ever touch it. No, that's not good. It's, you have to pick the sweetgrass to get more sweetgrass the next year. And if you don't, you lose connection, you lose place, you lose all of that. And the land slowly dies because you are letting your connection to it die. So don't do that. Include us. Make something sacred because you love it. And that's all we ever ask. We're not asking people to go away. We're asking for good neighbors, because we don't own this place, and we never did. You can't own your relative, but we treat it like a relative. So maybe help us.
Well, thank you so much. So much to think about. So many great thoughts. As Melody said, please, this is a time when we transition into a conversation, and we welcome your input. We have had a few people place things in chat, so we'll go there first. And the first person I'm going to go to here is David Bray. And you brought up something about the retreat farm, David? I see Jack did as well.
Yeah, sorry. No, I just would be interested in hearing more about the project at Retreat Farm. I live in Brattleboro, and it might be something I'd like to be involved with if looking for volunteers.
Sure. I can try to address that. So Atowi, the project that I mentioned earlier, is under sort of like the oversight of Elnu Abenaki, because they are the indigenous band in the southern part of the state where Retreat Farm is, on the West River Meadows. They're called the Meadows, even though they're flooded because of the building of the Vernon Dam. Another graphic example of decisions that were made. But Atowi is relatively new. It's just come into existence this past fall. The idea is that we will share stories. Basically, we will be telling stories to the people around us and to ourselves, learning from the land, learning from each other. COVID has prevented a lot of this public outreach from happening yet, but it is coming very soon. We will be having things such as workshops, lectures, demonstrations, story circles, guided walks through the landscape, meeting our relatives, talking about them, seeing what that looks like, how that feels. Just sort of a very hands on the land type approach through indigenous eyes. And it will be whoever I can wrangle in to help with this. And Melody will be one of them. Chief Roger will be another, and all kinds of folks. And not just Abenaki. There are indigenous people all over the place. This is America, and people like drift around like whatever. I was going to say something that wouldn't be nice, but there's all kinds of people everywhere, and we all have things we can learn from each other. But it's really, really important to ground oneself in the land that you are at, in this homeland, and to see it through Abenaki eyes, because these people know this place best. So Atowi will be hoping to surface a lot of these stories and share them. And the important thing to recognize is that they're not gone. They're not lost. They're all here still. You just need to sit down long enough and listen to them. And it might not be from a person. Listen to the rocks.
It will be a person. It just might not be the same type of person that you
The
think.
human being kind of person.
Yeah.
The human being being human, as John Trudell would say.
Thanks very much. It sounds like a great project. I look forward to seeing and hearing more about it.
Excellent.
Okay, well, we have a next comment from Sally Burrell. Sally, did you want to expand? You sort of made a comment more than a question, but do you want to expand on that for everybody?
Sure, thanks. I can't even see my comment now, but I remember what it is generally about. And over these past few years, whenever I tune into any of the Native people in this area, either at various places, I keep being reminded of all the life around me as being people. And it's slowly sinking in. I'm really, really starting to feel it more and appreciating it more. Whether I'm in my garden or I'm taking a walk, I feel like it's a fuller feeling. It's beautiful. So I'm really appreciating that I've learned to think about this from you all. So thanks.
Awesome. And I will say, I was going to say this before, but I think it still pertains to what you were talking about, is one of our friends who's Passamaquoddy, Wayne Newell, he says that nothing is ever truly lost. It is only us that's lost our way. So there's always something around you. And, in our worlds, there's no death. So souls travel between the worlds. And in this world, I might be a human. In the next world, I might be a tree, but I'm still me. And all that ever was and all the information that we need, it's never gone. And our ancestors still talk to us all the time and guide us. So people always say, oh my God, so much has been lost. We're fine. Everything's going to be fine. Just go out and pray that the sun comes back today, and thank your food, and thank the whole world around you, and live a little bit more and as being a center to things. And I think the whole world can be more beautiful. That's the value of diversity, seeing through somebody else's eyes and seeing beauty where you didn't see it before.
Can I add a little bit to that? This idea that all of this is around us, and it's always here, and it is available for us to interact with. If we are willing to admit that and acknowledge it. There's a word in the Abenaki language that expresses the concept of being grateful or being thankful, and that word is indalamizi. And the way that word translates, indalamizi, is quite literally, it means I am in the normal way of being. That is how one expresses gratitude. I am in the way that I should be. And why would I be any other way? Because that's kind of ridiculous. Like, look around. Look at all this. This is normal. That's not normal. We have all this talk about COVID. When are we going to go back to normal? Folks, that was not normal. Here's an opportunity to make a decision and move toward normalcy, which is another word to say balance, which is another way of saying being in a good relationship.
Thank you for the mic drop.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. Martha Rabinowitz, you've put up a couple of questions. Do you want to ask one of your questions here?
Yeah, thank you. I'm just thinking, Vermont has mostly grown back into forest, and just would love to hear more insight in, as you were saying, that the forests when Ezra Stiles came here were beautiful. Like, how could we move ourselves toward that? And as you said, that involves interacting and being part of and living in the forest. And how do we move toward a more keeping our forest beautiful?
Mel? Okay. Well, and I think you also mentioned, and I'm going to tie them both together. If I remember, you were the one talking about hunting and fishing licenses and forest management practices. Yep. How can that be applied today? Well, when I think that, not all Abenakis might see the way that we see, but we have, Rich and I have tried actively to understand historically how our people walked through the world, and that then transfers to us and how we want to walk through the world and how we want our children to walk through the world. And so there can be no greater thing than reestablishing your relationship to place and what that means of who you are. And so when my daughter was born, one thing that my partner and I did is he introduced her, and we both introduced her to creation. And basically with the hunting and fishing licenses, getting everybody back out, and this idea and this question of what does sovereignty mean? Do we even have it? If you have to ask somebody else for permission for something like, oh yeah, hunting and fishing, or going out into ancestral territories, like I will tell you right now that if we have a sacred place that is continuously sacred, I make it sacred because I'm still continuing my relationship, even if it's on what is called private property. That is not the way that we function. I still go there. I don't care who owns it. This is my homeland, and I'm gonna go and have a relationship to that place and to those forests and to those lands. And tying everybody in, especially with the hunting and fishing licenses, it's going to reestablish the relationship people have. And a lot of people, we already go hunting and fishing, but maybe some other people will get to go out and reestablish what that means to go out and to take a life, or to interact with something, or to just be out into the world and speak words into creation, see all these other people. So nothing can be better than that, right? And I think it could only be good. So for me, I think that's part of what it is. And in terms of sovereignty, knowing, well, why do you need to ask somebody else for permission to do these things when this is a new system that's come on top of ours? And so if we were indigenous people, then treat us like indigenous people, because you don't own us and you don't have a right to control what happens in our daily lives and how I interact, right? And how I go out to the forest and, maybe we collect some birch bark, or we collect whatever, or, but we always thank it, right? We always thank all these things for their sacrifices. So this whole relationship of reciprocity, it all plays into itself. All these questions are interconnected because we can't split ourselves into boxes like A, politics, C, religion, whatever. It all is who we are, and we walk through the world with that lens, if that makes sense. So anyway, maybe I lost some people there, but
yeah, it's great.
life's
Thank
hard.
you so much.
Yeah. And I'm gonna have to go because my daughter is having a teething problem. She's 1, and I need to go over and make sure she's okay because she's struggling. So thank you for having me, and good luck with everything tonight.
Thank you, Melody.
Thank you.
Yeah, bye.
Well, we have a question from Andrea.
So I guess I would direct this one to Rich since Melody had to leave. I'm just wondering if you have particular advice in the context of the wisdom that you've been sharing with us tonight of how we can individually address the climate crisis, you know, in the framework of the wisdom that you've been sharing. If you have particular thoughts on that, or you know, recommendations of what to focus on.
Well, that's an easy one.
Sorry.
Tell us.
No, I don't have I don't have an easy single answer to that, because the place where we find ourselves as a species relative to this planet has developed over time and through deeply ingrained patterns of behavior. And those paradigms, those ways of being, they need to be deconstructed. They just do. If we continue down that path, it's not going to go well. I have to say that I'm rather pragmatic about things. I have core beliefs. I have ways that I use to make my decisions and to operate by, but I don't think this is going to end well, because people are people. The earth will be here, but the people part is the people's behavior is the fundamental issue here, and we need to address that. And we can look, not to be romantic again, but we can look to indigenous ways of being for those lessons. There's, you know, you can throw statistics at it really easily. One that comes to mind is the fact that in areas of this world, on this earth, where land is still under the purview, the control, or the general oversight of indigenous people, 80% of the world's biodiversity resides in these places. 80%. Step away from those indigenous areas and that number plummets, because people are behaving in a different way. They have separated themselves from things and commodified them, objectified them, and they have stepped out of relationship. Relationship is the operative word here. We focus on the human part, but that's only the beginning. Of course we focus on the human part because we're humans. We identify with our own kind first. But we are only one of many brothers and sisters. And the earth is our mother. It is our mother. We would not be here without it. And one would not treat one's mother in that way, in the way that we have. English is a language of objectification. I am obviously into linguistics, right? So English is about 75% nouns. It's just an observation. All languages are different. Abenaki is a language that is 75% verbs. Things are happening. Things are in relationship with each other. And we talk about the world in this way. In English, we talk about things in terms of how much they're worth, how big they are, which is more important, how many there are. This is a language of objectification, and English has become the language of business because it works really well. It does not serve us well, however. I see my friend Dave Cohen's hand up, and because he's my friend, I'm going to call him out.
You know, you would think my hand would get tired by now, but Rich, really wonderful. You speak my language so eloquently, probably better than my language. Yeah, I think personhood is such a vastly important thing, and we exist in a particular configuration of personhood that we think is normal, and as you're pointing out, it's really not normal. It's you know, devoid of so many of the contacts and context that we need to form relationship and be in reciprocity. I love that, and I just want to also thank Melody for her beautiful contributions to this. One thing you talked about that totally struck me, and is kind of about the work that I do as a psychotherapist. I work with a lot of people that I work with. It's a lot about personhood and who we consider ourselves to be and where our skin ends, and and also I do a lot of work, of course, in transportation. You were talking about change, and one of the most remarkable features of just walking in the woods is something that we call in our Western culture motion parallax, and that's just like the essential character of as you're walking through the woods, watching the trees and the nearest to you seemingly to move faster than the trees or the mountain in the background. And that itself is part of that thing that you were talking about change. That I'm a big fan of Heraclitus, who wasn't an Abenaki, but he was Greek, and he was the guy who said the only constant is change, and nobody ever crosses the same stream twice, because neither you nor the stream are the same. I don't even think we cross the same stream even once, but that's a whole nother thing. And so a lot of my work has to do with how we move on the landscape and why that really matters. And I'm wondering, I don't think that this question even makes any sense, but is there any Abenaki kind of discussion about the automobile and its implication as far as supersizing our bodies on the landscape and moving at extreme speeds with essentially deprived sensory experience of the world and ecological and empathy for the world around us, both the peopled and the more than peopled landscape? I'm wondering, is there been any discussion regarding the automobile and our relationship and our reciprocity with this world?
Wow, that's mind blown, Dave. That's a really good question. I haven't heard it posed in quite that way, examining the implications of car culture and how that affects our relationship with what's around us, or the fact that we are insulated from it when we're in our cars and moving at great rates of speed. One thing that comes to mind is that, again, I'm going to turn toward language for lessons. The word that is used for the root word that is used for the act of walking. If you're a native person, before all of this wondrous miracle working technology showed up, basically the way that you got around was either in your canoe on the water or on your feet, right? You were on your feet, you walked. Excuse me. And so quite literally in the language, that root for walking, osa, plays out in the way that one describes living. To live is to walk and to move through the landscape. People are called Pomosawinoak, the ones that walk around. And I think whereas that may have been a limitation because you couldn't do anything other than walk around, it does describe the rate at which one would interact with the world around you. In this way of walking around and looking at things from different angles, examining it. Pomosawinoak actually suggests the fact that you are sort of wandering around, and that you're getting different perspectives as you're moving through the landscape. For instance, if two of us were standing in a particular place and we're looking at a specific tree in front of us, and we were to describe that tree, we're going to describe it. I would describe it in one way. I see the bark has this number of furrows, and they have this kind of a texture. And there's a branch up there at northeast, to use a compass reference, that sticks out, and it's about 3 inches thick. But now I'm going to say, so you, Dave, what do you see? And you're going to describe the same tree to me in a different way. Because you are standing in a different place
Right.
And that you have a different perspective, and there is no objectivity. There is no objectivity. Just get rid of it. Everything is subjective, and it's all real.
Well, Rich, that sort of connects with some of the work I do around transportation. The word actually means to carry over. And that's exactly the same root meaning of the word metaphor. Both transportation and metaphor are the same words. And actually the word to commute means to transform. So as we move through the landscape, or if somebody, we're in a different position from somebody else, we're seeing the world from a different perspective and constantly changing with it. I love that. Thanks so much.
Cool. Steve, you want to call somebody else out? I know we're getting close to time here too.
I think we might have time for one more. Clifford, you've had your hand up as well.
First, I want to really thank Steve, Dave, and Rich for their wisdom. I'm a transplant from the city. I lived in one place for the last 50 years. And all of us can share those moments of connectivity. And, but many of us cannot share the movement that we're talking about. Everything is in motion and movement. And I think it's in those moments of connectivity that we begin to see that we're actually moving with nature. I mean, we look at sunrises, we might see a tree, but these are only fleeting moments. And I wonder the space in human history when the Industrial Revolution took over, or when colonization took over, and when nature was separated from our nature, from the human nature, Western man. And it slowly became separated from indigenous peoples, and not purposely, I don't think. And I wonder if we're at a time in our human evolution that we are now being forced to look at our relations and realize that they are just as valuable as the objects that the Industrial Revolution and modernization has, created. They're more valuable. As a matter of fact, without them, there's no value. Without nature, there's zero value. So I'm just wondering if this is a human problem on the planet right now, and how can we transform those moments of connectedness into more like longer moments of connectedness to nature, and realize that there's only motion, there's always change, there's nothing constant. And if you look at the indigenous populations that have been in the Americas, especially here, they always change their location hundreds of miles from season to season, going with nature. And I'm sure it was similar to all indigenous peoples back then. They fluctuated with nature's movements because they were connected, and they felt like their life came from that relationship. How can we how can we get out of the stagnation that the modern consciousness has gotten us into, and realize that we have to be willing to risk rather than have everything, think it's so easy, but without the risk and being involved with nature in a more personal way on a daily basis, we will not move forward. I mean, I'd like to be optimistic, Rich, but you pointed to the fact that we're in trouble right now as a species.
Clifford, maybe Rich can wrap that up with a closing statement in response to that great question. Rich.
Sure. Thank you, Clifford. You bring up a really good point. So what do we do? I'll throw this out there. As human beings, as Melody alluded earlier, the creation story, what did people end up with? We ended up with this brain, and we ended up with the ability to recognize that we have responsibility to everything else that's around us. We would not be here without plants. The plants would not be here without the sun, our grandfather. Then we have plants, and the plants feed the animals, and we eat the animals and the plants, and we depend on all of this, and it's rather facetious to think otherwise. However, we've convinced ourselves, and we're living on borrowed time. So why is this? And what do we do about it? As human beings, we have this mind, and we have these hearts. The only thing that we have is the ability to make a decision. We don't really know what to do, so we have to make a decision. Everyone else on this planet seems to know what to do. So we need to make a good decision. How do we make our decisions? Based on what we know. How do we know what we know? It depends on what we've been told. We need to listen to different stories. Where are you getting your stories from? Most of us all get our stories from the same place. Mainstream media. All of these things, we are being fed a certain story, and this is the story, and this is where we're ending up, because this is how we're making our decisions. If we listen to a different story or different set of stories, we can internalize this and make different decisions. And that is your responsibility, every one of us, one at a time. And then we talk to each other and we share our stories, and we can start to make better decisions and move toward balance, because we are out of balance now. It's really simple. In balance, out of balance, make a good decision. That's how I look at it. Make a good decision. In the moment. Every moment is another set of decisions. And if you listen to your heart and you're listening to some good stories, you will make a better decision. Easy peasy.
There we go. Easy peasy. And we'll get it right eventually, maybe. Well, I think that brings us to the end of our evening. Rob has I guess a thank you slide. There we go. And this will be recorded in the next couple of days to be able to catch it and share it. And I want to thank you so much, Rich, for joining us tonight. Thanks, Suzanne, for lining things up. And of course, thanks to Melody, too. And thanks to all of you folks who joined us tonight. It's been a great discussion.
And thank you to Melody, who's not here.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you all. And just to remind you, all of our conversations are listed up on our website. So if anybody wants to share this with somebody else, I'll be posting this probably tomorrow afternoon. But all of our other virtual conversations are posted there. And there's some listed under community conversations, and then there's some are political and legislative talks. So you may have to search for some of them. But also, if you go onto the Sierra Club website, you can see the calendar of events once we post them. If you participated in one of our community conversations, I try to email everybody about our upcoming events. We have a couple scheduled in a couple weeks, but nothing next week yet. So just stay in tune. But thanks a lot, Rich, and I'm going to personally connect with Melody and thank her as well for the presentation. So, but thank you all who participate in this great conversation, and Steve facilitating, and Suzanne for lining it up with all of you. So thank you all. Good night.